I never thought something like this could happen to me. My granddaughter, Grace, had always been the apple of my eye. From the moment she was born, I took her under my wing, showering her with love, attention, and support. Her parents lived far away, and I was the one who picked her up from school, helped with her homework, and spent countless hours making her feel safe and loved. I thought she would always have my back, especially when I grew older. But as I got older and my health started to decline, I began to notice things were changing, things I never imagined would happen. It started with the small things. Grace would stop by less frequently, cancel plans at the last minute, and seem distant. At first, I thought maybe it was just the busy life of a young adult. But then, one day, she called me and suggested I look into moving into a nursing home. "It would be so much easier for you, Grandma," she said. "You wouldn't have to worry about anything, and they would take care of you 24/7. You can finally relax." I wasn't thrilled about the idea. I had been independent my whole life. I didn't want to be in a nursing home, especially not at my age. But she was so convincing. She told me that I'd be much safer, and I wouldn't have to worry about the house anymore. "You've worked hard all your life," she would say. "Let someone else take care of you now. You deserve it." I felt a little uneasy, but Grace was my family, and I trusted her. She told me she would handle everything, so I decided to put my trust in her. Little did I know, Grace had been planning this for months. Her intentions were not as pure as she led me to believe. She didn't care about my well-being at all. What she cared about was my house. I was living in a modest home that I had worked my whole life to pay off. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was everything I had left. It was the place where I had raised my children. And now, it was the place where I was supposed to retire in peace. As soon as Grace convinced me to sign the papers, she wasted no time. She had already made arrangements for me to move into the nursing home, and I hadn't even finished reading all the paperwork. She had me sign documents that transferred power of attorney to her. At the time, I didn't think much of it. After all, Grace was my granddaughter. She would never do anything to hurt me, right? But things started to seem a little off. After I was settled into the nursing home, Grace would visit less and less. She came by occasionally, but her demeanor had changed. She no longer seemed concerned about me or my well-being. I began to hear whispers. People in the nursing home would mention that Grace had been looking into ways to clean up the house and get rid of old stuff, things I had worked hard to collect over the years. That's when I started to feel something wasn't right. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between Grace and one of the staff members. They were talking about how they could simplify things and make sure everything goes smoothly. When I asked Grace about it later, she told me not to worry. "It's just about getting things organized for you, Grandma," she said. But I wasn't convinced. I had been around long enough to know when something didn't feel right. It wasn't until I received a letter from my lawyer a few weeks later that the full picture began to emerge. Grace had been secretly working behind my back to transfer the deed of my home into her name. She had used my declining health to manipulate me into agreeing to things I never should have. She had convinced me that I needed to be in a nursing home, but in reality, she just wanted me out of the house so she could take it for herself. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. I had given this woman everything. I had poured my heart and soul into raising her, and she was plotting to take everything I had worked for. The house was all I had left, and she had made me believe that she was just looking out for me. How could she do this to me? As the realization set in, I felt both anger and sadness, but mostly I felt foolish. How had I been so blind? I had trusted her, and she had taken advantage of me when I was most vulnerable. She had used my age and declining health to manipulate me into signing over my home. It was as if everything I had done for her meant nothing. I was nothing more than a tool to her, a means to an end. At that moment, I knew I had to fight back. I couldn't let her steal everything I had worked for, not after everything I had done for her. But I also knew that Grace wasn't going to give up easily. She had been planning this for too long. And so, the battle began. I just couldn't believe that the granddaughter I had loved and raised was capable of such a thing. But now I saw the truth. And the truth was that Grace wasn't the sweet, loving granddaughter I thought she was. She was a manipulator who only cared about what I could give her. When I first began to feel unsettled, I tried to express my concerns. I asked Grace why she had insisted I move into the nursing home, why she seemed so uninterested in keeping me at home. I told her that I wanted to stay in my house, that I didn't feel comfortable in this unfamiliar place surrounded by strangers. But Grace wasn't interested in hearing any of it. Instead of being understanding, she dismissed me with an indifference I had never seen in her before. "You're being dramatic, Grandma," she said, almost with a hint of annoyance in her voice. "This is what's best for you. You're too old to be living alone. You'll be much better off here. I can't be taking care of you all the time." I was shocked. How could she speak to me like that? Hadn't I spent years helping her when she needed it the most? Didn't I deserve to be treated with a little respect? But it wasn't just her words that hurt. It was the way she acted. Every time I tried to share my thoughts or feelings, Grace would turn her back on me, literally and figuratively. She would busy herself with paperwork, glancing over her shoulder at me as though I were some kind of inconvenience. If I tried to tell her about my worries, she would wave me off as if I were just another problem to solve. She had no time to listen, no patience for me or my needs. The worst part was when she started to get impatient with me for asking questions. She would snap, "Grandma, just trust me. I'm doing what's best for you. Why can't you understand that?" Her tone was sharp, dismissive, and condescending. She didn't want to hear about my discomfort or my objections. To her, my feelings didn't matter anymore. I was a burden, and nothing more. It was clear that she was taking control, not because she cared for me, but because it was the easiest way to take away what I had left. Grace had begun to make all the decisions for me, and I couldn't even stop it. She would tell me when I needed to eat, what I needed to do, and when I needed to take my medication. She insisted on managing my finances and even started making decisions about what would happen to my house without consulting me. She was treating me like a child, like I had no voice, no opinions of my own. It wasn't just in the nursing home either. When I had tried to tell her that I wanted to move back home once I was feeling better, she brushed me off with a few cold words. "You're not going anywhere, Grandma. You need to stay here, where it's safe for you," she said. "If you leave, it'll just make everything harder on me." That was when it hit me. I was being pushed out of my own life. Grace had made up her mind, and nothing I said mattered. I was no longer part of the decisions that affected my future. She was running the show, and I was simply supposed to follow along. The feeling of helplessness that crept over me was overwhelming. My granddaughter, the one person I thought I could count on, had turned into someone I couldn't recognize. But even worse than the dismissal was the way she tried to make me feel guilty for speaking up. Every time I mentioned how much I wanted to go back to my own home, she would sigh dramatically and tell me how hard it was for her. "You're making this so much more difficult, Grandma. I have enough to deal with," she would say. "You're just adding to the stress." She made me feel like I was the one causing all the problems, as if I were being unreasonable for wanting to be in my own house. She twisted the situation, making me doubt myself, making me question whether I was being difficult for no reason. It wasn't long before I started to believe her. Maybe I was being a burden. Maybe I was just too old and too tired to take care of myself. But in those moments, I felt a deep pang of sadness. How could Grace, of all people, turn on me like this? How could she forget everything I had done for her over the years? It was as though none of that mattered now. I had spent years giving her my love, my support, my time, and now she couldn't even take a moment to listen to me. The more I tried to fight back, the more she pushed me away. It was like a wall had been built between us, and I had no way of breaking it down. She made it clear that I was just another obstacle standing in her way, another hurdle to overcome. And in her mind, the only way to get rid of that obstacle was to make me feel small, insignificant, and easy to control. It was a hard pill to swallow, realizing that my own granddaughter didn't care about me the way I had cared about her. But at that point, I knew that this wasn't just about a nursing home. It wasn't just about me needing help. This was about her desire to get what she wanted, to get my house, to get control, and to push me out of the picture once and for all. I wasn't going to let her, though. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me without a fight. It wasn't until I had some time alone in the nursing home, away from Grace's constant presence, that things started to click. A nagging feeling that I couldn't shake started to grow inside me. There was something wrong about this situation, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. For a while, I chalked it up to being overwhelmed by my new surroundings and the sense of helplessness that often comes with aging. But then, one phone call and a simple conversation with my lawyer opened my eyes to the truth. I remember that afternoon clearly. I was sitting in the small lounge area, trying to keep myself busy with a crossword puzzle, when I saw my lawyer's name pop up on my phone. I had been meaning to call him, but somehow, every time I tried to discuss my will or my house, Grace was always there to interrupt. So I had been avoiding the conversation. That day, I finally decided to answer. "Mrs. Pierce," my lawyer said, with a tone that sounded a little more serious than usual. "I need to talk to you about the documents you signed recently." I hadn't even thought much about the papers Grace had insisted I sign a few weeks earlier. She had told me that they were just forms to finalize my stay in the nursing home, and that I didn't need to worry about them. Grace was always so convincing, always reassuring me that everything was for my own good. But now, as I spoke to my lawyer, I began to feel the weight of his words. "Mrs. Pierce, I've reviewed the documents you signed," he said carefully, his voice taking on a cautious edge. "There's a clause in there about your home. Your house is now legally tied to the nursing home care, and it looks like Grace is the one managing it. I'm afraid she's taken full control." My heart sank. I could hardly believe it. My own granddaughter? I felt a lump form in my throat as my hands began to shake. This couldn't be right, I thought. It couldn't be possible. "You need to be aware," he continued, "that this is not standard procedure. It's highly unusual for someone to take control of a person's assets without their full consent, especially when they're of sound mind." I felt a cold chill run down my spine as the truth started to unfold. Grace had manipulated me. She had used my declining health, my vulnerability, to her advantage. I had trusted her. I had believed that she cared about me. But now I realized that all of her actions had been part of a calculated plan to seize my home. She had been pushing me into the nursing home under the guise of concern, while secretly planning to take everything from me. The more I thought about it, the more I saw the signs that I had missed. Grace had always been the type to be sweet and charming, especially when she needed something from me. She had always known how to make me feel like I was doing the right thing, even when I wasn't sure. She had convinced me that moving to the nursing home was my best option, that I would be better off with the care and attention that they could provide. I had trusted her judgment, never questioning her motives. But now I understood that she wasn't trying to take care of me. She was taking advantage of me. I felt foolish. How had I allowed myself to be so blinded? I had been so focused on trying to please Grace, so eager to make her happy, that I had ignored the growing sense that something wasn't right. She had used my love for her, my desire to make her proud, as a tool to manipulate me into signing away control of my life. That evening, I sat in my room, staring out the window at the fading light of the day. The room felt colder than usual, and the quiet was deafening. As I sat there, I thought about all the years I had spent raising Grace, giving her everything I could. I had supported her through her struggles, stood by her when she needed me. And now, she was doing this. She was treating me like I didn't matter. I was no more than a means to an end. I felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak. How could she do this to me? After everything I had done for her, this was how she repaid me? I had been nothing but kind, supportive, and loving, and yet, she had only seen me as a way to secure her future. It hurt more than I can explain, but more than the hurt, there was a growing sense of determination within me. I was not going to let this happen. I had to find a way to take control of my life again, to fight back against the manipulation that Grace had so carefully orchestrated. She may have thought she had me trapped, but she had underestimated me. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I contacted my lawyer immediately to start taking the necessary steps to regain control over my house and my assets. I couldn't let Grace get away with this, but even as I made plans to fight back, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at me. How could someone I loved so deeply, someone I had sacrificed so much for, turn on me so coldly? The truth had finally hit me like a ton of bricks. Grace wasn't the person I thought she was. She had used me, manipulated me, and discarded me once she had no more use for me. And now, it was time for me to take a stand. The realization of what Grace had been doing to me weighed heavily on my heart, but I knew I couldn't let this go any longer. The time for silence had passed. I had to confront her. I had to let her know that I wasn't the helpless, easily manipulated person she thought I was. I wasn't going to allow her to get away with what she had done. One morning, I asked the nursing home staff if they could arrange for me to meet Grace in the visitation room. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten as the day approached, knowing the conversation would be difficult. But I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. When Grace walked into the room, her usual warm smile greeted me, but I could see the coldness in her eyes. It was like she had already resigned herself to this being just another task she had to manage. Someone else to control, someone else to bend to her will. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she stood by the door as if preparing to leave at any moment. That simple act alone told me everything I needed to know. "How are you, Grandma?" she asked, her voice too sweet to be genuine. The words were hollow. She wasn't asking about my well-being. She was just waiting for me to let her take charge again. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye. "Grace, we need to talk." My voice was steady, but I could feel my heart pounding. Grace raised an eyebrow, her posture becoming a little more rigid. "About what?" she asked, still standing. I clenched my fists in my lap. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me, not anymore. "I know what you've been doing," I said, keeping my voice firm but calm. "I know you've been pushing me into this nursing home, and I know why. You want my house, don't you?" Her expression didn't change immediately, but I could see the tension in her face. She was trying to hide it, but the nervous flicker in her eyes gave her away. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" she said, her voice taking on that soft, pleading tone she always used when trying to deflect. "I just want what's best for you. I've been looking out for you, haven't I?" I shook my head, my disappointment growing by the second. "No, Grace," I said, finally letting my frustration slip through. "You've been using me. You've been taking advantage of me, and you've been trying to take my house. You've been plotting this from the very beginning." Her smile faltered, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of her true face. It wasn't a caring, loving granddaughter anymore. It was someone who had long ago shed any pretense of affection and was only interested in the next step of her plan. "Grandma, you don't know what you're saying," Grace said, stepping closer now, her voice rising with a touch of frustration. "You're confused, and I'm just trying to help you. You've been in here for months, and I've been the one visiting you, taking care of things. You should be grateful." I couldn't believe my ears. Gratitude. She was the one who should be grateful. Grateful for the love I'd given her all her life, for the years I spent supporting her, helping her through school, and caring for her when no one else could. And this was how she repaid me? "I'm not confused," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I see exactly what you're doing, Grace. You've been making all the decisions for me, signing documents I didn't understand. And now you want my house. You've been treating me like I don't matter." Her face hardened, and I could see the anger begin to rise in her. She crossed her arms, her lips curling into a tight, unconvincing smile. "You're not being rational," she said, her tone condescending. "I'm doing what's best for you. This is all for your own good. You're just being stubborn. I'm only trying to take care of you." "Don't you dare," I said, standing up from my chair. "I'm not an idiot, Grace. I know exactly what you're doing. You don't care about me. You care about getting your hands on my house. Well, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to let you manipulate me anymore. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as she processed my words. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I could see that she was losing control. She had always been the one calling the shots, always the one who manipulated me into agreeing with whatever she wanted. But now, I wasn't backing down. Fine, she said, her voice cold and sharp. If that's how you feel, then I guess there's nothing more to say. She turned on her heel and walked out of the room without another word. I stood there, watching her leave, a mix of anger, sadness, and relief flooding over me. For the first time, I had stood up to her. I had confronted her and made it clear that I knew exactly what she was trying to do. And even though I could feel the weight of her cold response, I knew I had done the right thing. But I also knew that this confrontation was just the beginning. Grace had shown me her true colors, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The days following my confrontation with Grace felt like a whirlwind. There was so much emotional turmoil swirling around me, but in the midst of all the chaos, something within me clicked. The weight of her manipulation, her betrayal, finally started to sink in, and instead of feeling defeated, I felt a shift. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was beginning to feel a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. It was as though, after all the years of being manipulated and controlled, I had finally broken free from the fog. Sitting alone in my small room at the nursing home, I looked out at the crisp autumn leaves falling from the trees, their vibrant colors a reminder of the seasons of life. I had always loved this time of year. It felt like a fresh start, and in that moment, I knew that I needed to make a change. I needed to take control of my life again, even if it meant standing up to the very people I had once trusted the most. It had been weeks since Grace's betrayal, but I hadn't been able to shake the sting of her cruelty. I had spent a lot of time reflecting on everything she had done, the way she had slowly manipulated me over the years. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much she had come to see me as nothing more than a means to an end. She had made it clear, whether intentionally or not, that I was nothing but a stepping stone to securing her financial future. I had spent decades of my life building a home, raising children, and trying to make the world a better place. I had always given freely, loved deeply, and believed in the value of family. But now, in my later years, I realized that Grace had been using me all along as a pawn in her game. The realization cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. But rather than succumbing to the pain, something inside me began to awaken. I was no longer that vulnerable woman who could be easily manipulated. I was not someone who could be tossed aside when I was no longer deemed useful. The pain of betrayal turned into a fierce determination. I had a choice. I could allow Grace to continue exploiting me, or I could take control of my future and make a decision that was entirely mine. The first step was obvious. I knew that I had to contact my lawyer. I had known him for years, and he had always been someone I could rely on. He was calm, level-headed, and had helped me with legal matters in the past. When I dialed his number, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what kind of battle I was about to face, but I was resolute. When he picked up the phone, I didn't waste any time. "I need to change my will," I said, my voice firm but steady. "I've thought it through. Grace is no longer going to be a part of my future. I want my entire estate to go to the church." There was a brief silence on the other end. I could almost hear him processing what I had said. "Are you sure, Margaret? This is a big decision. You're talking about your house, your savings, everything you've worked for." "I'm sure," I replied, without hesitation. "Grace doesn't care about me. She never has. She's only interested in what she can get from me, and I won't let her have it. The church has been my refuge, my sanctuary. They've supported me when I had nothing else. I want them to have what I leave behind, not someone who's used me for her own gain." My lawyer was quiet for a moment, and I could tell he was weighing my words. "Okay, Margaret, if you're certain, I'll take care of it. I'll start drafting the new will." The conversation ended, but the weight of what I had just done settled in. I had made the decision. I had taken control of my legacy, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. Over the next few days, a sense of peace began to replace the anxiety that had been clouding my thoughts. I had no illusions that Grace would simply accept this new reality. She would fight me, and it would get ugly. But I didn't care. I had made my choice, and I knew in my heart that it was the right one. One Sunday, as I sat in the small church, where I had spent so many quiet moments of reflection, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. The church had been my sanctuary for so many years, a place where I had found comfort, guidance, and community. Now, it would be the beneficiary of everything I had left. The thought filled me with a quiet, unshakable joy. The priest's words echoed in my mind as I watched the service unfold. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth," he said, "but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven." I had always believed in this, but now, more than ever, I truly understood the meaning behind it. My decision wasn't just about money, it was about making sure my legacy was something that mattered. As I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of the church and the sense of community, I smiled to myself. I had taken control. I had made a decision that honored my values, my faith, and my dignity. No matter what Grace tried to do next, I knew that I had done the right thing. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. It was as if the storm inside me had finally passed. I was at peace with my choice, and for the first time in a long while, I was able to let go of the hurt and the anger. I had stood up for myself, and now I was free. It didn't take long for Grace to realize what I had done. As soon as my lawyer informed her that I had changed my will, she exploded. I could almost hear the rage in her voice over the phone when she called me. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I wasn't ready for the coldness and fury that came next. It was as though a switch had flipped in her. The sweet, charming granddaughter I once knew had transformed into someone entirely unrecognizable. "You can't do this, Margaret. You can't just cut me out like this," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. I could hear her pacing in the background, no doubt fuming. "That house is mine. You know it. You've always promised it to me. You can't just give everything away to the church. You have to change the will back." I was sitting in my room at the nursing home, holding the phone tightly, feeling my grip on the situation start to slip. But I refused to let her see my fear. I wasn't going to cave into her tantrum. I had already made my decision, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate me again. I took a deep breath before answering her, my voice calm but firm. "Grace, I've made my choice. It's done," I said, as steadily as I could. "I'm not going to change my will. I've given everything I have to the church, and I don't owe you anything anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a brief moment, I thought perhaps she had finally come to terms with it. But I was wrong. The silence was only the calm before the storm. Grace's next move came as no surprise. She hired a lawyer. She called every lawyer she could think of, trying to find someone who would fight me and my decision. The phone calls started pouring in. Every time I picked up the phone, it was someone new, claiming that Grace was just trying to protect her inheritance, or acting out of concern for me. But the more they tried to convince me, the more determined I became to stand my ground. I had never felt more sure of my decision. One day, Grace showed up at the nursing home with a lawyer by her side. The moment she walked in, I could tell she was furious. Her face was red, her eyes were wide with indignation, and her posture screamed entitlement. She was used to getting what she wanted, and now that I had refused to bend, she was determined to intimidate me into changing my mind. I was sitting in the small lounge area of the nursing home, sipping tea, when she stormed over to me, her lawyer trailing behind her. "You don't get to do this," she hissed, standing in front of me, hands on her hips. "You don't get to just leave everything to the church. You promised me that house. You promised me that inheritance." The lawyer tried to soften the situation, but I could tell he was just as uncomfortable as I was. He must have realized that the fight was already over before it even started. But Grace was relentless. She had this idea in her head that she could guilt me into submission. "I'm just looking out for you, Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This isn't good for you. You're not thinking clearly. You need to change the will, or else, well, things could get very messy." I could see the desperation in her eyes. She wanted the house, she wanted everything I had, and she wasn't going to let it go without a fight. But I wasn't scared, not anymore. I had lived my life long enough to know that sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones. "I'm not changing anything," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "I've made my decision, and you need to accept it." Grace's face twisted with rage, but instead of arguing further, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. The lawyer followed her, but not without casting one last apologetic glance at me. It was as if he knew the battle was already lost. But Grace didn't stop there. She began calling the nursing home, trying to pressure them into getting me to change my mind. She spoke with my doctors, my caregivers, anyone who might be able to help her in her mission to take control. She even went so far as to try and publicly humiliate me, claiming that I was no longer mentally fit to make decisions for myself. One day, I received a phone call from a local news outlet. They had heard about Grace's accusations and wanted to get my side of the story. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me. Grace was using her platform, her connections, to try and turn the public against me. She painted herself as the victim, the heartbroken granddaughter who had been denied the inheritance she was entitled to. I didn't know what to expect from the interview, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let Grace define me. So, I agreed to speak with the reporter, determined to tell my side of the story. I wanted people to know the truth about my sacrifices, my life, and my decision to leave my wealth to the church. When the story aired, it sent shockwaves through the community. Grace's carefully crafted image of the grieving granddaughter crumbled in the face of the truth. People began to see her for what she truly was: a woman more interested in money and power than in love or family. It wasn't easy, but I stood tall. I refused to let Grace's manipulation tear me down. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer afraid. The truth was on my side, and that was all I needed to keep moving forward. The days that followed the public fallout with Grace were nothing short of grueling, but through it all, I could feel something shifting inside me. An undeniable sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I had been stuck in the shadows of my family's demands and manipulations. I had let myself be treated as less than I was, all in the name of love and sacrifice. But now, I was done. The phone calls, the guilt trips, the endless attempts to sway me, none of it worked. I knew deep in my heart that I had made the right decision, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Grace, make me feel otherwise. And yet, there was one final confrontation left to face. It came unexpectedly one evening when Grace showed up unannounced at my nursing home. I had received no warning, no call, nothing. She simply appeared at my door, looking as though she was ready to take on the world. The same entitled expression was plastered on her face, and there was no mistaking the determination in her eyes. She was convinced that if she pushed just a little harder, if she made one last desperate plea, she could break me. I knew this would happen. Grace wasn't going to give up easily, not when she had so much at stake. But I was no longer the woman who had put up with her manipulation. I had become stronger, braver. This was my chance to put an end to it once and for all. When she walked into my room, I could see the anger radiating off of her. She wasn't just upset, she was furious. But this time, I didn't feel a flicker of fear. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. "I've had enough of this, Margaret," Grace said, her voice cold and sharp. "You can't keep doing this. You can't just cut me out of everything and expect to get away with it. I'll make sure this doesn't end like this. You'll regret it. Her words were sharp, but they didn't pierce me the way they once would have. I had heard them all before. The threats, the manipulation, the hollow promises. I wasn't interested in listening anymore. I stood up slowly, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair, and met her gaze head on. For a moment, I just looked at her, really looked at her. Gone was the sweet granddaughter I had once adored. In her place stood someone who was so consumed by greed and entitlement that she had lost sight of everything else. "No, Grace," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "I won't regret this. You've made your choices, and so have I. I gave you everything. I loved you like my own, and yet you've turned against me. I'm not afraid of you, and I won't be manipulated anymore." The words hung in the air between us, thick with finality. For a split second, I could see the crack in her armor. Her face flickered with something, perhaps guilt or maybe regret, but she quickly masked it, masking it with a scowl. "Fine," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "You'll see. You'll regret this." She spun around, ready to leave, but I wasn't done. I walked to the door and stood in her way, blocking her exit. "Grace," I said, my voice low but powerful. "I don't want to hear it anymore. I've done what I've had to do. Now it's your turn to accept the consequences of your actions. This is my life, my decision, and you're not going to take it from me. So, leave. Just leave. And don't come back." She stood there for a moment, her fists clenched, her eyes narrowing with anger. But deep down, I could tell she knew that she had lost. I had finally reclaimed my dignity. With a final contemptuous look, Grace stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, heart pounding but resolute. I stood there for a while, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew that this was a turning point for me. I had fought for my independence, for my right to live on my terms, and I had won. The world felt different now, lighter. Grace might have thought she could intimidate me into submission, but she was wrong. I wasn't that woman anymore. And I was never going to let anyone, family or otherwise, take my power away again. The tension between Grace and me was palpable after the confrontation, but I knew that the battle was far from over. Grace wasn't just going to walk away quietly. She had too much at stake. She wasn't done with me yet, and I had no doubt she would stop at nothing to try and convince me to change my mind about the inheritance. But in my heart, I knew that there was no turning back. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. In the days that followed, I found peace in the silence. The calls from Grace came less frequently, and her visits became fewer as well. It was as if the storm that had raged between us was starting to subside, but I could still feel the weight of the decisions I had made pressing on my shoulders. This wasn't just about standing up to Grace anymore. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my future, and my legacy. I had no desire to leave my money to someone who saw me as a tool to fulfill her own ambitions. Grace didn't deserve it. No, the one place that had always given me solace, the one place that had helped me through my darkest days, was the church. That was where I had found comfort, love, and acceptance when I had none. That was where I had forged lasting relationships, where I had been lifted up when I felt like the world had forgotten me. And it was to that same church that I had decided to leave my inheritance. It wasn't just about money. It was about sending a message to Grace, to my family, and even to myself. I wasn't going to let my life's worth be measured by what I could give to others for their personal gain. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had worked for. The church was where I felt truly seen, truly valued, and it was where I wanted my legacy to live on. The day I signed the papers was one of the most liberating days of my life. I felt a weight lift from me, a burden I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of my family's expectations. But this act, this final decision, allowed me to step out of that shadow and into the light. I had spent days thinking about it, going over the details with my lawyer, ensuring everything was in place. I was resolute, My entire estate, all of my savings, my house, and everything else was to go to the church. I didn't need a big legacy. I didn't need anything flashy or grand. I wanted my legacy to be one of faith, charity, and community. The church would know how to use my money to help others in ways that would truly matter. On the day I made the donation official, I walked into the church with my lawyer and the paperwork in hand. The place was quiet, peaceful, and filled with the kind of stillness that I had come to love. The stained glass windows cast colorful shadows on the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of candles and incense. It felt like home. I handed over the documents to the pastor, my heart calm but full of emotion. This was it. This was the final chapter. I had taken control of my life, and I had chosen to leave my legacy in the hands of those who would appreciate it, who would use it to help others the way I had once been helped. As I stood there, watching the pastor take the papers and prepare them for filing, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. It wasn't about revenge or spite. It was about choosing peace over chaos, love over manipulation, and purpose over greed. When I turned to leave the church, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't filled with resentment. I had done what I needed to do. Grace had her chance, but I wasn't going to let her control my life any longer. This was my way of saying, I will not be used. I will not be taken advantage of. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. After everything, I moved to a small cottage by the lake, away from the drama and deceit. The quiet was healing. I spent my days enjoying the simple joys of life, taking walks, reading, and helping out in the community. I felt free and at peace, no longer burdened by the manipulations of my granddaughter. As I watched the sunsets over the water, I knew I had made the right choice. I had taken control, stood up for myself, and finally found the peace I'd longed for.